All right, guys, welcome back. Speed Up and Get Your Hits podcast. It's been a minute, but we're glad to be back on the horn here, and I think we got something pretty cool lined up. Some good areas of discussion tonight. If you're just finding us, it's just a podcast about shooting by some shooters, and hopefully for shooters. We hope the conversations are educational. I'm Billy with SpecTrain. As always, I've got Nick from Velox Training Group and Brennan with Gateway Defense with me, and then also we have a special guest tonight, Mr. Myles Cook. From Walter State Community College, the Regional Law Enforcement Training Academy. Is that the right
Yes,
all the
sir.
words in the right
Right.
order there, Myles? Appreciate it. So Myles is a full-time law enforcement trainer, and we're going to get into some interesting discussions with regards to law enforcement training, some kind of where it's been, where it's going, and just geek out on training in general. I think a little bit. We all get excited about that kind of stuff, and so hopefully it'll be helpful for folks that are consumers or providers of training, which I think is most of our audience. So it should be a good time. But guys, as always, I'm always interested to hear, man. Personal training, man. What are you guys working on? What you been trying to improve on? What you been doing in your personal training?
And I've done a lot since the last podcast. I think the last time I was working on a bunch of rifle stuff, and I still am, but I've been like kind of touching on AIWB stuff again.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, I've neglected it, right? And so I took it out. I don't know, maybe like a month ago. I was like, let me take this thing out. I don't feel like putting on that whole belt thing. And I was like, man, the index is different out of this, and I don't like the way it makes me feel. And so that's usually the like what sparks training for me. Like I don't like the way it makes me feel. In other words, it's not up to you know my minimum standard, I guess you could say. And so
Sure.
like I'm gonna hammer on it until it's not. So I've
Right.
been working on a bunch of AIWB stuff. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
It's good.
Um,
So always good to get back to make sure you're well rounded and touch all the points, right?
it's tough to do. It's tough to balance. I've actually been hitting rifle stuff recently. It's pretty freaking cold up here in Wisconsin. So the pistol, like I first of all, like I don't shoot pistols with gloves. I think it's dumb. So I just don't do that. But rifles, like it's a little bit easier to shoot with gloves, or like one glove or something like that. So been hammering on that a little bit recently, exploring a lot of maybe for the sake of the internet, maybe not. The doubles thing with rifles, how far back you can push stuff. There's a little bit of drama on the internet right now about that. I think it's just something worth exploring. Like most people, I don't think are getting what they could be out of their rifles. Like generally, I'm seeing people shooting their pistol and rifle about the same for different distances because the target is about the same size.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that comes down to a
So
lot of
true.
the way you're mounting the gun and how much dot movement you're actually getting, and then also experimenting too. Like at least for me, my dot doesn't go straight up and down like 6 to 12 when I shoot, right? It kind of makes a little C shape. But learning how to be predictive with that, just the same, right? Like it's just the way my gun is tuned or whatever muzzle device I've got on it. Like that's just how it runs. So figuring out how to still be predictive, hammer those splits, still call your shots, and really kind of pushing that, I think has been super interesting. Yeah, that's kind of what I've been hammering on.
It's interesting. I've been doing a lot of very similar stuff, um, largely because my support hand is kind of screwed up. Although I think it is getting better now, finally, and so I've been adding a lot more pistol work back in this week, which has been nice. And we were able to fire up the internet on some stuff, which was fun. So, but anyway, yeah, the rifle stuff's been interesting on a couple fronts. Been doing it's kind of like you were actually, but you were kind of talking about Brennan, a lot of the double distance stuff, specifically experimenting with um, a bunch of different guns and muzzle devices and trying to figure out how it kind of impacts capabilities because it most certainly does. For sure. Different rifles set up different ways, different muzzles, devices, and so forth absolutely impact how the rifle behaves, and how quiet it is when you're running it fast at distance and so forth, and can make it a lot easier or a lot more difficult to kind of recover it at speed. I mean, I think Brennan, I remember you shooting my rifle, my main squeeze, not too long ago, and you were like, "Man, I'm usually not that good," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know. Like having a rifle set up well, like makes a big difference, and can make life a lot easier for sure. But it's when you're coaching people that have different equipment and so forth, it's important when you're thinking about things like standards, especially, I think to consider some of those angles and figure out kind of what the capabilities are of different setups and different distances and so forth. Been playing with that. Also, actually shot my first DMR match here recently, which was a lot of fun with Mark from JBS, and actually enjoyed that quite a bit. Was way outside my comfort zone. Not the kind of thing that I do. Did way better than I expected. I think that is not nearly as competitive as USPSA is my impression at first, which is unfortunate. But maybe we'll get in there and try to change that. I don't know. But it was a lot of fun. So I've been experimenting with some longer range stuff as well, and working on that, learning, putting just a lot more time in with kind of different positional work and all that kind of stuff, working on the wind and all that kind of stuff. So it's been a lot of fun for sure. Myles.
Yes, sir. If you care to know,
sure,
I'm working on all the things you guys are really good at, right? And so I keep trying to work on those.
Okay.
Mine lately, I've had of course, Billy, I know I talked to you about it. I'm wanting to get back in the competitions.
Oh, cool.
So, working on that scoop draw, really working on the presentation from a duty setup.
Okay.
A lot of work on doubles and
Nice.
trusting my conformations.
Nice.
And working through that. And so
Nice.
one thing I don't honestly, even as from the Marine Corps, from law enforcement, SWAT teams, I don't enjoy shooting rifle. And so I don't do it much, and I've got kind of left behind. I know I tagged Nick and maybe Mark from JBS and something about that LPVO versus DOT and when it's good and things to think about. So I've been reading up on it, but training almost always handgun.
We love to hear that around here. That's all good stuff. That's all good stuff for sure. Good deal. Well, so Myles, I think it's funny. I first met you. We don't waste a lot of time with like bios and life stories around here. I care a lot less about who people used to be versus what you can do right now, right? I first met you I guess about a year ago now in a class, and I guess it's always really exciting to me to see folks from law enforcement and military backgrounds show up in performance shooting environments and put that work in. And so I guess let me ask you this, man, what coming from a military law enforcement in a background like you have, what got you interested in kind of the performance shooting scene, or what motivates you to show up in a class with stages or be getting it back into competition and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I don't, I shot very competitively, very locally.
Okay.
Did okay, and it really enjoyed it. And of course, it'll come as no surprise to you. It doesn't take much to be the best law enforcement shooter in your area.
Sure.
It really doesn't take much, right? So you kind of stay in that box and never grow outside of that, and never learn that. And I think of course, I'm sure we'll get to this, but I think that's part of the issue with law enforcement training in general.
Yeah.
You stay in that box and you protect yourself with sayings like, well, that's competition, that's not the real world.
Right.
And so I don't know if it's folks are afraid of not being the best out there, on the range. I imagine that's probably a good chunk of it. And I think part of it is not being willing to take a step back and say, maybe I'm not the expert. Maybe we should bring an expert in. And so that is being so that is the reason that I come to that level up class. And so I wanted to learn and continue to develop some concepts that I was not comfortable with. And even when I got there, I learned new concepts that I didn't know that I wasn't going to be comfortable with.
Sure.
And so I think that would be the main reason. I'm really lucky being the training coordinator at an academy, in that most other officers probably don't get to cherry pick training around the country where the price tag is not such a big deal.
Sure.
And not that it was a bad price tag, and it was pretty close to me.
Sure.
But where we can go and do something like that. I'm in a pretty unique spot, and also kind of in a unique spot to be able to obviously change our training here at the academy and have some influence with agencies across the state.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot of really cool stuff there, but whether you're in law enforcement or not, man, if you I talk to guys all the time about the value of being around and shooting, obviously with people that are better than you, right? Because if you exist in kind of a fishbowl, like you mentioned being on a SWAT team or whatever, and it's like people would be surprised to hear this, but if you're the guy that dry fires once a week, like off the clock, like you're probably the best shooter on your team, like very likely, right? And so after a few years of being the best shooter that like it's very easy to start thinking, man, I'm just about as good as you can get, right? Like there's not really a whole lot of growth potential left anymore. I'm much at the kind of top of the food chain. And if you think that way, like you are 100% correct, and that's a massive limiting factor for any growth that you can do, right? And so sometimes, for folks, just open your eyes and seeing like what's out there in different fields, different areas, and understanding kind of like what folks can do behind guns is just like the key that unlocks that growth potential for folks and allows you to really just start exploding in what your capabilities are. But yeah, just kind of staying where all you can see is those, kind of the folks around you that do the same thing you do. A lot of times I feel like it can be super limiting, obviously, for your growth potential.
Yeah, you'll never grow outside of there. And I'm sure you guys have discussed before, and I'm quite what is your lane, right?
Yeah.
And what's your wheelhouse? And I hope to, I think I told you last week, I really hope to keep developing my technical expertise. But my lane, my wheelhouse is to know enough to be a little dangerous, in a few different domains, and pull the experts and knowledge together into a large training program.
That's great. So I guess, kind of backing up to the training space, right? I mean, I'd love to hear from your perspective, as you've obviously come a long way, I'm sure, since you started, and you've connected with a lot of good folks and been putting a lot of good work in, and have grown, obviously I can tell quite a bit in your shooting. What, coming into law enforcement and stuff, how obviously I'm sure you went through kind of a traditional training pipeline and so forth. How did you feel like in the firearms space that training, I guess, prepared you for, in terms of capabilities, behind the gun? And then, I guess, how did that motivate you to start innovating and changing and growing things and doing the kind of stuff that you're doing today?
Yeah. So I think so. The academy that I went to for law enforcement basic was very similar to what we were doing, and it's 500, 1,000 rounds, maybe 40 to 60 hours of training, and
hold up, 40 hours of training, and you only shot 1,000 rounds.
Dude, you beat me to it.
That's incredible. What were you doing for 40 hours?
Running lines.
Yeah.
Which is an inherent part of the issue.
Sure.
And so that is another thing we've certainly changed.
Yeah.
But we start off with training like that. Of course, it's like any the best way I could describe it, NRA basic class, right?
Sure.
Here is your front sight focus. Here sight alignment, sight picture, flush across the top, equal amount of daylights down the side, prep, press, cycle, release to an audible reset, and then press again. Right. Sure. I see everybody smiling. If you're listening,
we know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah,
right.
100%.
And so
is that where that red shirt came from?
Oh yeah. Always.
Come on, man.
So that's where we come from, right? And so of course there is some inherent issues with that. Sure. And but I guess and that is generally what was going on out on the range. And so you get the safety, you get one way to press the trigger, you get one way to align your sights, then you load up 3 mags of 5 along with 15 to 20 other people, and you just start running those qualification drills.
Yeah.
And so the short answer to your question, Billy, is not very good.
Yeah.
For quite obvious reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much the story that I hear from everybody. I think that some of our listeners will be pretty that are exposed to the kind of training that we do. It's kind of surprised to hear some of that, but it's I think a travesty that we're putting a lot of officers on the street in harm's way with what I feel is some pretty subpar training and in some cases, equipment and just general level of preparedness, and not only to potentially defend and save their own lives in the line of duty, but also protect their community. And it's a shame. So, man, I imagine that kind of experience for you that's got to be motivating, obviously, to become a part of the solution. And I know it is for the rest of us. So I'd love to hear some, and we've obviously had lots of good conversations about this, but I'd love to hear about some of the things that you guys are doing, obviously as a part of, a system that has a lot of, an institution behind it and a lot of history and tradition, right? I know it's sometimes probably an uphill battle, but what are some of the efforts that you're doing to try to change that and kind of modernize that training that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky here at our academy. So we're done through a community college. We generally graduate 200 to 250 officers a year. Now we are set in on time, right? And we have to do all the other training, and certain other limits. But as far as changing things, we probably have a little bit more flexibility than a lot of other places or states. So, for example, our qualification is not state set. It's not set by any board. In other words, I could change that qualification course within certain parameters.
That's good.
To see, right? And so, I think that gives us a lot. I will tell you, at least on face, some things we changed. And so, I know I was talking to you before we started about the domains that we're in and what we're orienting towards. So one of them being performance handgunning concepts. So in other words, like, what is the best way in which you would call performance handgunning? And then I'm just talking about the handgunning portion. What is the best way to run that gun conceptually, right? What are the things I need to know? And Nick, I think I might have heard you say this at some point, and I'm sure everybody on here has said it. And I probably say it a little bit differently, talking about crushing that support side until that trigger finger cannot move that gun. And that's a pretty good way to teach it. And now, whenever we're out there, I'll just say this as an example, the first time that I want you to shoot a quarter-second split is not on the street. Right, Billy?
Yeah.
And so it makes sense. And I seen a post, and I can't remember who it was, talking about OISs. And of course, they look nothing like a qualification. Right. They look a lot like a bill drill.
Yeah.
And so I think there's, beyond the value of a bill drill in and itself for performance handgunning, I do think there is a lot of benefit there for officers for performance handgunning concepts, whether that be the grip, sight confirmation, varying different types of trigger works, things like it, things that you guys are doing. Your all's wheelhouse, right? So that's part of it. That is not my wheelhouse. That's why I reach out and get experts from that wheelhouse. The other one that may come as a surprise to you, I don't know, is adult learning principles, modern adult learning concepts. So some of that, at least in the law enforcement world, I know Chris Butler from Canada is kind of at the top of some of that. Rob Gray, who I believe is a kinesiologist for motor skill retention and acquisition. And there's a couple, and I'm not going to bore you to death with theories, but ecological dynamics, constraint-led approach, it's motor skill development and retention based on the environment. And so we've had a definite push to go towards that. And some other things, schema theory, goal achievement theory, and everything that kind of develops down into human performance.
A lot of good stuff there, man. I mean, you hit right off the bat, I think, on the the qualification side of the house, is like you talked about. Traditionally, what essentially drives a lot of YELI training that we see is just simply getting dudes to pass a qual, right? And primarily for the purpose of liability protection, right? So I know we've talked about this, but that mantra you hear on every range of, hey man, there's a lawyer behind like every single bullet that you fire, and it's like, yeah, that's true on the street, right? But like you said, man, it's like, you to me, that is a solution that propagates the problem, right? Because what you're basically telling dudes in training is like, hey, you do not have permission to like ever miss the target, and so you're always just going to be, super slow and controlled with every single shot that you fire, and make sure you're never going to miss the target. And then of course, man, you get on the street and you're trying to save your own life, and there's rounds coming your way really quick. You're not going to sit there and be like, right, and be shooting that way anymore. You're doing that bill drill, right? Like you talked about. And so, we're setting folks up for failure in training by having them train in a way that doesn't look like anything like obviously what they're actually going to be doing in real life. I'm sure that's an uphill battle to encourage guys to actually push to failure and so forth in law enforcement training. How are you guys kind of approaching that in terms of obviously pushing to failure in training, but also, being able to switch back to that, execution mode when you need to, and have that control and be shooting within your capabilities? What's your kind of approach to that, Ben?
So I think the approach to that, and this should come as to no surprise to any of you, but especially to you, Billy, is now teaching varying trigger work, right? Now teaching varying sight confirmations. And it may be something as simple as control target, attack target, and switching those back and forth and trying to get that realm so they can start to build those skills. You're spot on about what you're talking about with the exploration. It hasn't been that much of it hasn't been an uphill battle. I think by and large, now I've been at this for a couple of years here on this range, and the instructors have been very receptive, very, very receptive. They're very good, and they're very interested in nothing more than making the training as good as we can possibly make it.
That's awesome. And
so there's really no ego attached to it. Certainly not for me. Certainly not for many other instructors. So, we really, in the words, I definitely credit to you, Billy, that exploration versus execution, right? How do we get them to explore, find their limits, figure out conceptually how to get better in those, and then do what they need to do to execute. And so we set up drills in a certain way to the skill to be able to do that. And but I think that whole exploration is a mindset shift for the shooter, but also for the instructor.
Yeah.
And so, I think number one, not physically safe, but you have to have a psychologically safe range to do that.
Sure.
So in other words, now I know y'all don't do this on your range, right? Years ago, you start missing a called headshot or whatever, or somebody does something. All right, everybody guns down, run to the gate. Right? Now we're running back. Right. And so, that is not a place where I feel psychologically safe.
Yeah.
To miss and to explore and to gain on skills. So we treat the range very differently than I think what a lot of people would think that a police academy is. And our academy in general is not run in that manner. We're very culturally different. So we worked on that. And I think we go into, of course I mentioned ecological dynamics and all that. And I actually pulled up a thing here because this will interest you. It's a framework. I put it up so I don't misread it. A framework that studies behaviors of neurobiological systems, especially with processes of action, perception, and cognition. Framework that appreciates the whole athlete and the environment in which the interaction occurs. So, for example, right, 6 really well-placed shots at 3 yards in 15 seconds is great, but it doesn't get us anywhere in performance handgunning or the real world or an OIS or anywhere else.
Sure.
So, it has to be trained in a certain way. One of the changes we made was now we are interleaving the dry fire with live fire
Mm.
And in a very, very safe manner for 2024, interleaving that off range, but still on complex into force on force.
That's awesome.
Super cool.
So another, and I don't want to nerd out on you with schema theory and
Sure.
Constraints led approach and all that, but what it means, and this is something you'll understand, and all your listeners will understand. Every time I dry fire, man, I look really good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But for some reason, my body and the reaction and the action and the perception is different on live fire. So we're always trying to meld, our actions from dry fire, to mimic over live fire. Well, that needs to be trained in a very specific way. For example, based on this, if I was coaching a performance and gunner, when you dry fire, you should have a shot timer. That should be your go, right? You should put your hearing protection on and your eye protection. Everything in your environment should mimic the outcome you're looking for. And so for that reason, when you switch, okay, I'm good at the 7 yard, man. I'm really, really good. Now I go over to a force on force encounter, which tests that skill. And all of a sudden I don't remember anything I did. And I dumped like 20 rounds of ammunitions, right? What changed in me on that? And so kind of that guided self-discovery, which is a big part of some of those adult learning principles on how to actually meld those motor skills together.
That's really cool. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. The dry fire piece obviously has huge value, but I don't see it obviously being utilized. Even you would think in whether it's LE training or whatever it is, when you're in an environment where maybe you are under kind of a severe ammo constraint, how much you can burn over the course of training, you would think dry fire would be a natural solution there, but you don't see it being utilized either in an organized like class setting or through individual programming that's happening outside of that class setting. But man, that's I think the value there for guys is huge. For sure.
I think, of course, there's no argument, and I think Nick, I seen you post twice on it in the past few days, about dry fire. Just do your dry fire, right? And I think some of that is because of logistics and the way law enforcement has ran the ranges. And so, we're out there. Let's say I usually take about 2 weeks. A class of 60 is split up into 30, and let's say my firing line's 15. And so we just start 1.5 yards, 3, 7, clearing problems, trying to do individual corrections, right? That takes forever.
Mm-hmm.
And the other people are just reloading or getting ready for the next evolution. There's a ton of inherent problems in that. There's a ton of inherent slowness. And it's, the problems, me, you, and whoever we're having on the line are completely different issues. And we're having these problems maybe on different strings of fire or different techniques, right? So whether it be a laterally moving target or dominant hand work or shooting from the 15, which I know sounds probably like a joke to you guys, but that is a serious. You go from 7 to 15, man. It's like you just exploded 60 miles.
Yeah,
and dialing that back in and figuring out how to rein that back in, and so you're only able to spend a little bit of time on that laterally moving target or on that 15 yard. When we really sit down and thought about it, there's no excuse. I have a 180 range. It's just never been run that way.
right.
So, why aren't we doing that? So for 2024, for the first couple days, we're not running any firing lines. It'll be station work. And so, in other words, and you'll appreciate this, and I'll see some shaking heads, it'll be skills rather than drills.
Mm.
Yeah, it'll be novel in nature. And we'll work the skill and then demonstrate that as a drill, which would be the qualification.
Right.
Stage, right. And of course, you're intermixing that. You're demonstrating that live fire, dry fire, back into force on force safely, very, very safely, and doing that. And so their trigger time and they're dry fire, and it's going to be immensely lengthened just because we changed the logistics of how we're running the range.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, one thing I really, really like about that, Myles, is usually like people treat cops, at least from what I see and hear and stuff. It's like we can't do stations because like it's not going to be safe. Like this guy won't be safe, and so like doing what you're talking about, like you're telling people what is expected of them, and then they're just going to go do it. And like the other way, like, oh no, they can't be safe. It's like, man, these people are going to walk around public with firearms
in like a few weeks.
Yeah, man. Like we should start treating them as such.
You know,
like,
Nick,
in the rules, and then expect them to go, do the thing.
Yeah, you know, and I always talk because I nerd out on adult learning, but it's you're not being trained in that environment, right? And so I can't expect you to do that. I need to expect you to have some common sense once we went over the safety rules. And I've never had anybody stand on a firing line and just flat turn around. Never. And so I have no reason to think that stations set up outward 180 would be perfectly safe and then holstered up. And even going beyond one with that, Nick, when we've discussed is we always run a cold range. That's what we've always done. Mag out, slide lock to the rear, holster. And the reason for that is because that's the way it was done. Safest manner or whatever. And what that turns into on qualification or shooting strings is load up 5. Okay, now I'm at a slide lock emergency reload. I reload. And it becomes programmed based on where you're at in the street. And then when we go to scenarios or any other shooting exercise, they're lost on the actual programming of the mind and the body of when to perform that reload, whether it be emergency or make the decision to do a tactical reload.
Yeah.
And so we're actually going away from that too. They're going to stay holstered up. I'm going to tell them with the stations, they're going to load up just 3 to 5 to 6, whatever, random in a magazine. And then on their station, they're going to run dry. And they're going to have to do the reload. They're going to have to make critical decisions during it, which is a huge, huge change and a huge thing that we're trying to push is decision makers rather than just Olympic shooters.
That's so good, folks. I think guys don't realize sometimes how serious those training scars can be when you are doing things that don't make sense over and over and over again. There was a video I saw years ago that I think carried over from force on force training, where most guys, when you get in the house, obviously, the guy that you're shooting is your buddy, actually, who's like also a cop, right? And so their procedure when they were in the house was to essentially, like, you see the bad guy, you shoot him 5 times or whatever it is, and then you unload and show clear your sim gun, and then you hand it to the guy that you just shot to buddy check it to make sure that it's empty, and then you leave the house, right? And the guy literally did that in a gas station. Shot like 5 rounds at this guy, unloaded the gun, and like hands it to the bad guy, who's like still standing there, like
your turn, sir,
not seriously wounded, And it's like you wouldn't think that training scars could actually have that big of an impact on somebody in a life or death situation. But it's crazy when you see that kind of stuff actually happening. And so I think it's super important to think through things that way for sure.
I think that's one of the bigger problems too with like the only shooting cops are doing is quals, right?
Yeah.
Like a qual is just a drill, right? Like you were saying, Myles. And switching over from that idea of, working to pass a drill, and then switching over to like, let's develop the skills that we need to pass the required drill that we've got at hand, which is your qualification. I mean, I see that not just with cops, I see that with civilians, like all the time. Like they see a drill that they want to be good at, like whatever it is, a bill drill, 4 aces, whatever, a USPSA classifier. And they just kind of go ham on shooting that thing over and over, just trying to figure out how to make it work. And I think every good instructor that I can think of, like that I would take a class from, is totally getting away from that mindset and going like, look, let's figure out how to shoot and then apply those shooting fundamentals to more complex problems, like you're saying, and just kind of forcing people to like, okay, and I know how to hit this target at this distance, regardless of what that might be. Plug that in now to a more complex scenario, and just kind of let them start developing some of those problem solving skills. I think that's fantastic. And then, like you said, just run that qualification at the end. It's a drill that will probably include a bunch of the stuff that you worked on, but the training that they're getting out of it, the training value, is coming from all of the hours before you have to shoot that thing.
I appreciate that. I think that's certainly the case.
Yeah, it's I know we talk about this all the time, but it continues to be a message that is not really getting out there. that we continue to harp on the skills versus drills, side of the house. I tell people all the time, it's like, I think folks see drills in classes and so forth, and are like, oh man, that is, that's the magic sauce right there. I need to do this drill if I want to get better at this thing. And it's like, we were just talking about, range logistics. Like, I think from an instructor standpoint, like, so many of the drills that we do in class are like, man, I've got a bay that's 25 yards wide, and based on my class size, I need to figure out how to run at least 4 stations of an exercise that tests these skills. How in the world am I going to fit that into this space? Right? And just trying to be as creative as you can with a drill setup that you can set up that many times in a certain space. Man, it's range logistics based upon the class that you're in. It's not like that is the drill that any of us would probably be working on in our own personal training. Like, if we went into the home range and set it up, right? And folks don't understand that. It's like, we've talked about it before, but I just posted a video on this in the last couple of days. But I know we all get the question all the time, like, man, hey, what drills should I be doing, to get better at shooting on the move? And it's like, dude, if you want to get better at shooting the move, you should probably go set up some targets, and then you should shoot them while you're moving, and like try to get better at that, right? Like, it's not that complicated, right? And as a matter of fact, if you do set up a particular drill for shooting on the move, like, yeah, you're gonna get good at shooting that drill and that particular target array over time. But is that going to carry over to, all the dynamics and make you actually a well-rounded shooter, or shooting targets at different distances, different sizes, different styles, and different directions and so forth? Probably not. Like, you should probably be doing something different on occasion, right? You should probably be changing that thing up on the regular, and working through different challenges there if you actually want to get well-rounded at that skill. And so, I think it's a super important message to keep trying to get out to folks, for sure. But
I think with that too, like, you really have to have a willingness to fail in training, right? Because, like, if you're going to set up this random array of targets that you've never seen before, it's not a standardized drill, and you're just going to, like, okay, well, that's a no shoot partial. I would normally stand still and shoot that. I'm going to try to shoot that on the move. Like, chances of hitting that no shoot are probably pretty high if that's the first time you've ever tried that, right?
Right.
But like, I remember a time when I was like, the only training I was doing was shooting on the move, because I realized that, like, I really sucked at that. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was shooting targets that I would not normally shoot on the move, and I was failing a lot, but I was quickly figuring out where my threshold was and where to, like, work. Right. And so, like, in dry fire, then I'm going, okay, well, a 15-yard open target, I can shoot on the move, but a partial at 15 yards, not so good. So I'm going to work on that type of target size in dry fire, and work on keeping my dot where I want it to while I'm moving. And that type of willingness to fail, I think, informs a lot of how you're going to do both live fire and dry fire.
Yeah.
I think the willingness to fail is very, very important, and especially for the instructor, like, making sure that's an acceptable thing, especially out on a law enforcement range, and the novel environment, and that is all over adult learning, and being able, you guys are very good at your skill sets, right? And you can look at something very quick and determine exactly how you're going to shoot that, right? And exactly what your split times are going to be. And like you said, whether I can move on that or whether I can't. And so that's where we've missed the boat in some, in our training, whether it be for the name of safety or whether it be for range logistics. We get out there, hey, 98.2% chance of survival of a gunfight if you take at least one step to the right or left. Begging you to do it, but now I'm never going to let you do it.
Right.
I'm never going to let you move on that range. And so that's the way I'm going to continue to train you and then beg you to do it when you get outside of there. And
or I'm going to put you in a training environment forever where all you can do is take one step exactly to the left or right, right? And you're never allowed to move any more dynamically than that. Yeah.
So that was a great point. And so, we relooked at what we actually had to do for state qualifications, and we're still finishing some things on it. But our nighttime, what used to be called a stress course, and now I'll call it a decision-making course, takes into account, it would look more like a match, right? Where it's going to be like hit factor. It's going to be, your total time, all that stuff. And here's the reason for that. And I think we get lost on that. There is a qualification, and we will eventually meet the qualification,
Sure.
right? But in a stress course, if there is a person who can't guarantee me a 20-yard hit from behind cover, right? I would much rather you learn to make the decision to move at a safe point, not under fire, and take that shot at 10. And so when I have the ability to run those kind of stress courses, why in the world would we not do that?
Sounds a lot like stage planning.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting. So our decision-making course now, moving targets, good guys, bad guys, and it's novel, right? You're not going to see it beforehand, but it'll be you behind cover. And we've got a new, we borrowed it last time. I think we're going to get one called a gun box from Laser Ammo. And I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's a key fob chain and a box that kind of makes lightning in a hearing safe manner for gunfire. And so those decisions should be made during a lull in the gunfire. You should be seeking cover when you're hearing gunfire.
Sure.
Can I take this shot? What's the backdrop look like? 1,000 decisions that are much more than just that trigger.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're moving to your point.
But if you're having to think through, every step of the process with the trigger part, and that just, that makes the bandwidth far less freed up for all those other decisions you're trying to make, right? It makes it way more difficult. That's really cool. It's cool to hear you talking about that as in terms of, you have to make decisions based upon your skill set versus like, hey, here's the prescribed course of fire. Like you will go here and you will fire this many rounds, and that sort of thing, which is, again, that's a training environment that looks nothing like the real world in any way, shape or form. Right.
We had that on it, and we've changed our stress course this year. But it would be like a 15 from behind cover, 7 and 3, right? During the move. And it would be 5 shots because it had to be scored equally.
Sure.
So 3 and 2, reload. And then when we got into scenarios and reality-based training, I couldn't figure out why they were never reloading when they needed to, or why they were never seeking cover. And I thought, damn, I never trained you to reload. I never trained you to seek cover.
Right.
I told you when to reload, and I told you where to go. And it was a gigantic training spar on our end. And so we've changed that around.
That's really cool. You talked about failure, man. I mean, I say it almost even a little bit differently. Like not only like making it acceptable to fail is like a really good first step, but then like sinking in that idea that like failure is the goal of training. like if you're not failing, we're not getting anything done here. I tell folks in classes all the time, like you're very rarely ever going to hear feedback from me that sounds like good job. On occasion, you're going to sense that someone really needs that and you're going to have to give it to them. Right. So they just don't like beat themselves up too much, but usually it's either going to be like, hey, you screwed that up. Here, let's fix that. Or it's just going to be like, go faster. Right. It's going to be like, you didn't push hard enough there because you got all alphas. And that doesn't make me happy at all because I can't really tell you much about how to improve there. So let's just push harder until we find that failure point. And then that'll allow us to actually fix things. And grow. But man, in that exploration mode where you're working on that skill development, failure is the goal in a very real way, pushing past your capability points, just like in fitness or anything else, man, pushing past what you can do, that's where the growth happens.
How much of that do you guys think lands on the instructor? So I'll give you an example, Billy. So after I left your class and the level up with the movement L-shaped hallway, right? Mm-hmm. I demo that now. I use that. And I used to demo it in the sprint, then a walk, then a run. It really cuts your time down in about half. But what I do now, because I talk about that exploration and the execution and the expectation of failure and finding your limits. So I try to push it until I miss.
Yeah. Right.
Like I'm going to find my point where I need to improve. Let's all find it. Right.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think that I do think that's important. I think that it's tough. I'm a big fan of doing multiple demos of things like you were just talking about. I think that's important because on the one hand, it depends what the point of your demo is. Like, and if I only have one demo that I can do, then the point of that demo is to the best of my abilities, demonstrate the closest thing to a perfect run on that I can deliver in order to show folks like kind of what the goal is, right? How do we want this to be? How do we want this to be done? If you have multiple reps, then maybe I'll do the exact opposite of that and do a demonstration of exactly what I don't want folks to do so they can see what that looks like too, right? But yeah, I think there's definitely, a challenge as an instructor. Like folks come into your class, they're paying you to be some putting you up on a pedestal, right? A lot of times, and you don't want to hop off of that and show folks what failure looks like. And I absolutely do that. I try to, especially on certain things, intentionally push to the point where you're definitely not going to be seeing, perfection from me in demos, especially like stage runs, stuff like that. Like I'm not cruising and getting all alpha runs on stages. I'll tell you that right now. And I think that's super important for sure. For folks to be able to see, like, man, there's no such thing as a perfect shooter, and if there is, I'm definitely not it. And so yeah, I think leading by example there is huge for sure. That's a great point.
I think being willing to do it is big. Like I've been to some classes where the class standard was, whatever, like maybe like a 50% run or something for the instructor. And so then like the only way they demo that is at that class standard time or pace. And so it's like, oh yeah, you passed, but like that was really easy. And you did it really well, and you did it at a pace everybody could appreciate and learn from. But again, like it was really, really easy. And so I think if you have something set that you're asking people to do, like you need to be able to do that to the standard that you're asking them to, like without question, on demand. But if your class is structured in such a way where you can kind of set that up to where you can jump in and kind of hop on the train and get a rep, and then like, yeah, push it and do something that you're actually capable of, or push it a little bit harder if the class is set up to be kind of in that exploration mode of training. And if it's like, no, this is the end of the class and we're doing a final score drill or something, then like, yeah, that's probably not the time for you to push yourself and see what's possible.
Yeah, that's the issue. And another issue that I see, in classes that are, we talk about building around quals, but in the civilian sector, a lot of classes are built around standards, right? And getting folks to try to get a patch at the end of class or whatever. Yeah. And I have no issue with standards, but the point being, like, if the only shooting the instructor is doing is passing those standards in course, then obviously you're only seeing execution mode. You're not seeing exploration. And so for me, it's super important not only to kind of talk through those learning concepts as far as exploration, execution, but to, when you're running drills, like very clearly articulate, like, hey, here's the point of what we're doing right now. It's not to get all alphas. It's to, be pushing to the point of failure. And here's what that looks like. Right. And so
that sounds familiar, Billy.
Yeah.
I think my first run at level up in that course, I think, was double, triple everybody else's time, all alphas. And certainly a learning curve on where I can make up there.
That's cool. So you talk about the stress shoot, man. I'm curious. We've talked a lot about quals and stuff. How has your qual changed to reflect kind of the changes you're talking about in those training methodologies?
So what we're doing into 2024, obviously we're doing the hot range instead of cold range, varying trigger work, varying site confirmation, running the 180 range with stations. we're doing, and this comes into human performance, but visualization, things like that. Our standard, because there are certain quals that we have to hit in our state.
Sure.
And so it has to be 50 rounds. It has to consist of a few different things. That standard day qual, whatever you want to call it, remains the same. The actual execution of it, the way we train for it is going to be different.
Yeah. So what have you seen since you've been there? How has the changes that you've made in the training in terms of pushing folks to failure and so forth, how is that, or have you seen a difference in how prepared they are as far as passing that qual?
Yeah. So I think they are better suited for the qual, but not only just for the qual, they're much better suited when they leave.
Yep.
Whether that is getting into a gunfight that night,
sure,
or whether that is learning how to progress in their own skill sets,
sure,
and having a way forward. And so I've been lucky enough to kind of teach around the country, and I always use that exploration mode. And it's, if I only taught you this perfect Olympic style sight alignment and this perfect trigger press, and then I tell you to go faster, that can't happen.
Yeah.
It just cannot happen. But I never explain the other sight conformations or the other, the other way to grip and rip, right? And so we started changing those things around. I think they certainly are better suited for it. They do just as well, if not better, on the qualifications. We've seen great improvement percentages on the qualification scores, and shots dropped outside of assigned target zone. But I think they're better to leave here and say, this is what I need to get better on, and this is how I'm actually going to do it.
That's cool. Yeah, I think it seems to me, in my experience, I think folks obviously, the idea has been like, hey man, if you're making it okay to miss, obviously in training and that kind of thing, then it's harder for folks to switch that back off and switch back to that execution mode. But man, I found it's just the opposite, because the confidence that comes from not only hopefully your skills are now better as a result of that exploration, but the confidence that comes from actually knowing your limits and knowing what is required to guarantee results on target is huge.
Yeah.
Versus just having kind of one tool in the toolbox that you try to apply to everything.
One experience I've had that's kind of on a similar vein. I've trained maybe 4 or 5 different church security teams, and most of them have like some sort of shooting qual at the end of it, generally like just self-imposed or whatever. And it's the FBI qual or it's the state LE qual or whatever it is. Generally there's just like a fixed part-time and a it's a fixed part-time course, right? And so each string is fixed part-time. And in the past, what I've seen is guys like really freaking out about how in the heck am I going to get this many shots off at 15 yards, with a reload or whatever, in 10 seconds or whatever it is. And after going through a class where we're talking about all the same stuff, because we all teach the same principles, right? But like confirmation levels and trigger control and all these things, they are, what I see is like, okay, man, like this is a 15-yard target. What does that look like to you? And they're like, well, for me, that looks like a confirmation 2 target. And it's like, absolutely. And so they start dictating the pace based on their sights. And what I've seen is like their times, they're crushing the par times with a better level of accuracy, or a very similar level of accuracy to if a good shooter uses that whole time, because they're just doing what's required of them, right? And so they're getting the same score, but basing it off of stuff that we've worked on in class all day. Like I never do fixed part-time stuff in class, but then you ask them to do that and go, hey, well, what does this target require? And they just plug and play that solution into it, and generally crush the qualification.
Here's something I'm curious about, Myles, and I haven't actually talked to you about this, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. We've talked a little bit about what you've been doing, on the fitness side as well. Including, I think specifically individual programming, looking for linear progression, that kind of stuff for folks that are doing, work outside of, the traditional, group PT and so forth in order to progress. Have you brought any of those concepts over into the firearms world as far as individual programming at all, or what do you do with that?
That's an amazing question. And so I haven't.
Okay.
strictly because of maybe what that would take, or even on the front end timelines.
It's logistically challenging for sure,
Yeah,
which is why I was curious.
So, I would, at least in theory, and I would have to actually, Billy, I'd have to really give some thought to that. And obviously that would be the way, right? And that makes a lot more sense. The best that I've been able to come up with we have been focusing day one on the individual shooter, right? We are whole line of instructors. I'm trying to get you on maybe a 2-inch dot at 3 yards, at least to get the accuracy settled in. Then we can start branching from that with speed and other things. Obviously, going into the realm of the stations, we can start working those individual skills better. If I had, time, or it was broken up, that would be amazing. I'm not sure that's the case, at least for the way we sit.
Yeah.
For example, let's say it's a 9-week academy. I've got this 40 hours because their mornings from 5:30 until 10:30 at night are already dictated for other state training.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something I've been chewing on quite a bit, and ways to help other folks I talk about that do similar things to what you do as well. Obviously, it's challenging for for folks to be encouraging students to be like dry firing in the dorms and stuff, and that's going to be a tough one to sell. But I think if we can, not only teach folks how to shoot, but I know we all do this as much as we can in our classes, but teach folks how to train themselves once they leave, even post qual or whatever it is. Once they leave, man, here's how you put together a training plan, that you can continue on your own. I would love to think that you're, sending officers out to departments where they'll continue to get, great training on the clock and on a weekly basis or whatever, but that's probably not realistic, right? And so for folks to train themselves, I think is huge, obviously.
I think it's possible, so we here, so what Billy's talking about, obviously you think about a basic academy or platoon style, class style fitness, where your most fit just gets slower or weaker and your least fit are absolutely crushed. And I knew there had to be a better way. So that's one of the things we changed here. And it's individualized programming based off hack times and how, and every morning when you wake up, if we've got 2.25 mile run, 200-meter sprints, whatever, push-ups, whatever we got, me, Nick, Bill, everybody has their own expected times based off 70% or 80% of their original times. And so it's all individualized programming. And we have really good statistics from that. How we would get that for handgunning, no idea. Maybe a bunch of qualifier stages with times and reloads and movements, and then progressively try to improve in those domains. I certainly think it's possible. I'm not sure the logistics here for me.
Yeah, 100%. It'd be something good for us to continue to talk about and chew on for sure. But yeah, that's good stuff.
So I've got a question.
Yeah.
So I think we've all seen, videos of like OISs where there's like several cops, one person starts shooting, and I call this sympathetic shooting. One person starts, everyone else starts, and everyone is going as fast as they possibly can.
Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned like perception, how things feel, and you also mentioned how like, the first time someone shoots a quarter-second split, you don't want it to be, when all the beans are on the line.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to like what you do in their training to like make that perception feel not so fast.
Yeah.
That
So
quarter-second split.
I think some of that is done on the range, right? I think some of that is the actual way we set up, whether it's skills, drills, or even the lecture portion, how we're teaching that. And so, even something, as simple as, the trigger control at speed, Ben Silver style, right? Whether you're doing that dry, we actually introduced a metronome to the range. And so, we've got that out there, plugging over ears, just pulling that trigger, just the actual mechanical feeling of it, right? And then we branched that into live fire to try to get some of those speed components built up to where at least some of the shooters are more comfortable with it. I think, Nick, to answer your question, what we're going to be doing in 2024 full time in this interleaving of force on force will make a big difference into that. And those skills will be demonstrated on that stress course and then repeated a couple weeks later during reality-based training. And so we really changed up our reality-based training. But one of the scenarios now, it's not even a call for service. It's not a hood drill. It's nothing like that. But as soon as it starts, it's an active, not necessarily a gunfight, but a gun situation. And so what we utilized that for previously is to work all the things we couldn't work on a firing line square range. And where you would actually have to put thought into it. Is this person advancing on me? What position can I get to? What is my sight confirmation? Is there something I can put between me and this person? You know, if we even do a 1R1 on that with somebody advancing, and you wouldn't believe, you might believe, but you wouldn't believe the insane things that happen on a 1R1 with an advancing person. Yeah. And they know it's a 1R1. And so we had one have a malfunction, strip the mag, and work that slide, I don't know, 30, 40 times, you know, somewhere in a noodle loop. And we've got to do a better job of training this. And so we started introducing everything that we would do on a square range or the point that drill is trying to get across in a live setting, actually in reality-based training without all the other stuff you would get for a call for service, constitutional law, tactics, blah, 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 right? And so moving forward, I think we're going to do an even better job with that. Okay, this is 1 yard, bent elbow type shooting. Now, what does this look like on another person? When all of a sudden they're approaching and then they retreat, or they drop the knife, or somebody crosses in the background. And so you're starting to make the decisions to shoot, don't shoot, hold, you know, wow, I was really good at that mover on paper. And now when that dude's just walking, I can't seem to do anything or make a decision. And so I think that's how we're getting away from it, Nick, or at least I hope we're moving in that direction.
Interesting stuff, for sure.
That's cool.
No, I like how you were talking about, like, people are going to, you know, be shooting more or less like a stage for training. Like, I think that's awesome. Because, like, historically, like, what we've heard out of, and I'm not just picking on cops, but, like, if someone's going to say it, it's usually a cop, right? You know, matches aren't good because you always know where the targets are. And it's like, man, I could YouTube like 100 OISs where you know where that dude knew where the target was. So, I mean, it's pretty cool that you guys are going to like that realm of shooting. I think it's super practical for what cops do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. It's one of the things I talk about in class, but I think the carryovers from stage planning concepts are pretty cool. You know, stage planning is just like the way easier version of when you have to come up with a plan for something, how to address a problem like really, really quickly and execute it immediately, right? But if you can learn how to do it slow when you have the time to actually problem solve and figure things out, like over time, you get way better at doing it fast, or at least that's been my experience, right? And so, yeah,
it's just
pre-op.
Pre-op planning, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think some of that is and that's to Nick's question, is the way you've actually trained, right? And so you can't stand still. You can't take all day, right? And so, but not only that, even if I'm challenged on time and position, you know, and again, it goes back to the motor skill and some of the ecological dynamics. Did I see the threat in the first place, right? And so we have to put that back and interleave that into the force on force, where that decision in that stage is when you first see the threat presented. And so then you start making those other decisions. How fast can I go here? Can I see cover? What can I do? And the stage planning begins in about a half second.
Yeah.
Has introducing some of these new concepts to the way you guys are training, have you seen that make a difference in the desire for some of your guys to go out and train with performance shooters or instructors at all?
So I think so. So obviously, you know, at least the folks that I've worked with, you know, and shot with, you know, I sing your guys' praises. And you talk about leaving, but they leave here with years of physical training programming, and I try to get them to leave here with a plan for firearms training, videos. You know, in today's world, here's an Instagram page I want you to follow. Hey, here, you know, watch this for grip. Watch this, you know, for this motor skill. Watch this for, you know, sight confirmation. Have an idea what these things are and where they can lead you. And so I think they have, and I think it has developed. And I think getting away from the idea that competition shooters have nothing to offer the law enforcement realm, just totally getting rid of even that thought, has made a big difference. And so, you know, like I said at the start of the podcast, I know what my lane is, right? And so my lane is not being the world's most expert handgun shooter, because I'm damn sure not, right? And so I need to find the world's best performance shooters. And I need to mix them with the world's best human performance experts and mix that with the world's best adult learning experts on motor skill retention. And you mix that with, you know, you mix the competition shooter with the adult learning principles and the human performance, the way the mind works with, you know, tactics from folks who've been in 100 different gunfights, you start to get somewhere in legitimate training.
That's really cool. I like that.
Yep.
I think a lot of times, like, I'm looking for almost like that 30-second elevator pitch of like why you should get into, you know, this type of shooting and stuff. I think isolating that out and getting the best instruction you can from people who are experts in it in each of those respective fields, I think that is 100% the right way to pitch it. I love it.
Thank you.
That's cool.
Yep. It's good stuff, man. I'm encouraged because, you know, obviously the stuff we talked about earlier on in the podcast, as far as kind of the status quo over in recent decades in training, has been concerning for a long time. But I'm encouraged because I think we're seeing a lot of positive trends, and guys like Myles, I think, are having a big positive impact on the training space in general, but law enforcement training specifically. And I think things are moving in a great direction. I mean, Myles, I think the level up course we mentioned that you were in, I think, was like half LE guys in that course, which is like incredibly cool, right? To have those guys, and most of those guys, like you said, are paying their own way to show up and do that kind of training, and that's super cool to me. And so I'm glad. Hopefully this was a good opportunity to put out some of the good word about how training can be done and should be done, and you really can, you know, change some of these old concepts and push things in a good direction. And I know we'll all keep trying to continue that innovation and pushing things forward. And so that's been really great. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully this conversation was educational as always. And until next time, this has been Speed Up and Get Your Hits. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks.